Nowhere are the divisions in what's called the United States more evident than on the streets. Race riots, right-wing thugs. A president who eventually backtracks on his refusal to condemn white supremacists just weeks before an election. We're looking at the rise of extremism here on Roundtable. Hello and welcome from me, David Foster. In this, the latest in our series on how Donald Trump has changed America, we will talk to a black Trump supporter who brackets the Black Lives Matter movement with the Ku Klux Klan. As the election draws nearer, the spotlight has been on extremism and polarization in American society. While the Trump administration blames left-wing movements such as Antifa, white nationalists are the main target of complaints about violent extremism. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, white nationalist groups have grown by 55% since the start of the Trump era in 2017. In the first debate with Democratic rival Joe Biden, President Trump failed to denounce violence by the far-right Proud Boys towards left-wing protesters. He later distanced himself from those comments, and now voters are left to ask, who is the best person to lead the country when extremism is on the rise and divisions are apparently getting more dangerous? Well, time to take the conversation to the United States of America. Very pleased to say that joining us on Roundtable out of Nashville, Tennessee, we have Carol Swain, retired professor at Vanderbilt University, who's on the Black Voices for Trump's advisory board, wrote a book called The New White Nationalism in America. We'll find out what she thinks that is. We go to Newark in New Jersey next. There we have Sahar Aziz, professor at Rutgers University Law School, and then to Washington, D.C., where we welcome Ravi Perry, professor of political science at Howard University. Good to have you all with us on this program. In a little while, we're going to play the clips of President Trump and Joe Biden from that presidential debate referencing this issue. But Sahar, let me come to you first of all. That report from the Southern Poverty Law Center that says 55% rise in white supremacy since 2017, when Trump became president. It's pretty meaningless, really, isn't it? Because it could be from 20 to 30, it could be from 200 to 300, it could be from 2 to 3. What do you think is the scale of this problem?
Well, the Center for Strategic and International Studies found that there were 5 attacks in 2013 and then 55 terrorist attacks and plots by right-wing extremists in 2017. And there are many other reports, the study on hate and extremism, and many other programs that show there is a documented, demonstrated rise in right-wing violence and plots to engage in violence, which is a reflection of a rise in right-wing extremism or a mainstreaming of it. And many of us who study these issues believe that it is as a result of Donald Trump and the advisors that he has hired, their rhetoric that legitimizes right-wing extremism, in particular in the form of white nativism and white supremacy. Sometimes it is covered in thinly veiled claims that it's white shaming or it's anti-white discrimination. But what this is really about is that there is a number of white Americans who feel threatened by the changes in demographics of the United States, and they are feeling threatened that more and more women, more and more minorities, more and more immigrants are no longer willing to accept systems, laws, practices, and policies that clearly discriminate against these groups, right? When we talk about—
Can I just ask you this? I think we sort of know the background to it to some extent, but I want to ask you this. Is it just white supremacy groups that are causing issues, concerns, or is it all types of extremism? Because that is what this program's about.
Well, Trump is certainly trying to direct or diffuse the attention to what he calls left-wing extremists. But when you look at the violence and when you look at the facts, the right-wing extremists both are increasing in their following and as well as in their terrorist attacks and their terrorist plots. Now, at the same time, we do have a palpable political polarization in this country, which I believe is because of the divisive rhetoric that's coming out of the Trump administration. And so as a result, some people in the United States, although I think they're a minority and I think they're smaller as a percentage as compared to right-wing extremists, some of them are what we would call extremists on the left of the political spectrum. And so he's constantly trying to diffuse attention or distract attention to Antifa and these other groups. And Antifa, first, doesn't have a very big following.
Let's bring Carol in at this point, because I know that you say Antifa, which stands for anti-fascist, and the left, you say, are a global threat.
Yeah, first of all, I don't know, where the professor is getting her data, because I don't know about all of these 17 or the number she threw out of extremist attacks. I do know that in America right now, because of critical race theory, that all white people pretty much are being labeled as white supremacists. And the violence that we are having right now is coming from the political left through Black Lives Matter and Antifa. And as far as the Southern Poverty Law Center, they have been sued several times. They have no credibility. And I think it's a mistake to say that Donald Trump is responsible for the rise in white nationalism. When I wrote my book in 2002, there were issues that I pointed to that I thought would add to more racial conflict and turmoil in America. The things that I warned about in 2002, they predated Donald Trump. And so I think that we don't have, this big rise in white extremism, but I do believe that the violence that's taken place, that's driven by Antifa and Black Lives Matter, that it will galvanize more of the far right, the extremists. They will galvanize in reaction to that.
And I was quite surprised, Carol, let me say, to read that you say that Black Lives Matter is as dangerous a force as the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, I think they're one and the same. And the attacks that they do don't get labeled as hate crimes. And I believe that if we applied the civil rights laws and protections equally across race, and we characterize the hate crimes against whites as hate crimes, we don't do that now, they would far outnumber the ones against racial and ethnic minorities. I think we're living in a time period where it is a powder keg, and it's more so because we're ignoring crimes that are coming from racial and ethnic minorities, and they would certainly be more aggressive, I believe, and on the rise. And I think that that is a greater concern. I believe that both groups, whether we talk about whites or non-whites, they all have to be held accountable for violence.
Okay, let's get Ravi's view on that.
Oh, gosh. I mean, the rewriting of history by Professor Swain is very sad, having been educated in graduate school, having read her book, Black Faces, Black Interest. She apparently has moved, I think, even slightly from those somewhat, I would say, moderate views from the mid-'90s that were conservative at the time, but certainly did not indicate any of the kinds of rhetoric she just suggested today. For example, equating Black Lives Matter with the Ku Klux Klan. I don't think I've heard anything in this entire election cycle to be that ridiculous. And really, it's an embarrassment.
Look at what they're doing.
The Ku Klux Klan has killed tens of thousands and maimed and bombed houses. And Black Lives Matter is not doing that. And also, by the way, Ku Klux Klan is designated a hate group by Donald Trump's own administration, along with Proud Boys, designated by the FBI. And, this is something that is quite sad, that we've arrived at a place in society where we are equating the murder and maiming of Black people and Jewish people and gay people for centuries with the rightful, mostly peaceful protests of people from all over the world who are standing up and saying that Black and brown people and that their lives matter, that the thousands of brown kids and children, literally babies at our southern border, only because they're brown. We know if they were Nordic, they wouldn't be at that border still, living in cages that most of us won't even put our dogs
Ravi,
in.
Okay, I know you feel very strongly about this, but I want to go back to the Proud Boys thing, and we'll hear right now from
I'd like to
President
respond.
Trump. Well, Carol, please wait. We'll hear from President Trump now, what he said at the debate about the Proud Boys.
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. Do you want to call them? What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
who would
white
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud
militia.
Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem.
And this is what Joe Biden had to say in response.
Well, here's the point.
Go ahead,
the point
sir.
is that that's what he is, keeps trying to rile everything up. He doesn't want to calm things down. Instead of going in and talking to people and saying, let's get everybody together, figure out how to deal with this. What's he do? He just pours gasoline in the fire constantly.
Carol, I know there's something you wanted to say. I couldn't give you the chance just then, but go ahead now. There's other issues I want to cover, so please make it brief.
What I wanted to say is that the KKK is a group that we eradicated like decades ago. I bet you could not find 2,000 KKK members among America's population. But we do have people now, because of the identity politics, everyone is identifying by race, and that is totally contrary to what America as a nation is supposed to be about.
Carol, I understand that you wanted to say that. Let's move on a little bit, because I want to ask Sahar and, in fact, Ravi and you, Carol, if I may, what you thought, Sahar, President Trump meant when he said, Proud Boys, stand by.
He was telling them that I am not going to condemn you. He was very clear. He refused to condemn them. He refused to condemn white supremacy when he was asked. Whatever he said after the debate was merely due to political pressure and media coverage exposing that by not telling, for example, stating the Proud Boys should be condemned, or they are a white supremacist,
in fact,
or white
let's bring up what he actually said. This was an interview with Sean Hannity a few days after the debate. He said, I've said it many times. Let me be clear again. I condemn the KKK. I condemn all white supremacists. I condemn the Proud Boys. Sorry I had to interrupt you, but I wanted to be clear that we knew precisely what the president had said.
But he didn't say that during the debate. And when you say stand back and stand by, that's essentially saying, look, why don't you just wait until after the elections? Because right now you're causing me some political problems. And after I get elected, if I get elected, then I'll bring you back into the fold. I mean, Americans are not stupid people. And also, the Americans see his record. He ran on an Islamophobic, xenophobic, and a racist platform from 2015 and 2016. If you look at the Bridge Initiative coming out of Georgetown, if you look at the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is a credible civil rights center, if you look at many think tanks and the FBI hate crimes data, you will see that from 2015 to 2017, the number of hate crimes against Muslims and against Arabs skyrocketed. Right? It went from 50 to, some believe that it's up to 500. The FBI showed that it was 336. And the proximity in time is not coincidental. It's not an accident. When you spew hate, when you are a hateful person in your rhetoric, particularly when you have the bully pulpit as a presidential candidate and then as a president, you tell Americans it's okay to hate. And then that
Carol,
hate,
sorry, I've got to stop you. I've got to slow you down a little bit, Sahar, and throw to Carol, because I noticed that you've said that Trump has denounced white supremacists many times.
Yes, in fact, there's a video showing 19 times that he has denounced it. And if you look at his record before he was a presidential candidate, he was very much, friendly with black leaders like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, and he gave money, to lots of black businessmen. And the Southern Poverty Law Center, if they were a credible organization, they would have labeled Antifa and Black Lives Matter as hate groups. Let me throw this one at you.
Let me throw this one at you. You say there's that video 19 times. How many times is that since he became president? Because I had a quick look back through the archives and found the last time he said it before the Sean Hannity interview was in 2017.
I don't know, but I can tell you that what I think he meant when he was asked during the debate is, we're living in a moment in America and maybe across the world where all white people, because of a critical race theory, are being labeled as white supremacists, white privilege. And I think that white people feel under siege. And so if you're white, whether you're a racist or not, you're told that you are born a racist. And I think that that was what the president was reacting to, the fact that white people themselves feel under siege.
So perhaps he was politicizing. Perhaps he was doing that, Carol, when he made friends with Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson,
I
etc.,
don't know. He
etc.
wasn't running for president then.
Wait a second. When he was thinking about running for president, maybe he was just using that to his advantage and didn't perhaps mean it.
I don't know, but I believe that he's not a racist. If I thought he was a racist, I would not be supporting him. I wrote that book on white nationalism to warn people about what I saw happening because of the way we were approaching race in America. And I think we are at a dangerous point. I think we could end up in a situation where you would have mass violence coming from the left and the right. We already have it coming from the left. I think that there are extremists in the right that will respond, and I feel less safe as a person of color just because I see the violence coming from Black Lives Matter and Antifa, and I know that people will start retaliating. There are so many violent crimes, like a 5-year-old boy that was on his bicycle who was executed, and the woman that said all lives matter who was executed. These people were shot dead because they said those statements. There are numerous cases like that. They're not labeled as hate crimes. They should be.
Ravi, let me come to you and ask about the Proud Boys. You've described them as quasi-militia, and yet they portray themselves as nothing more than simply concerned citizens who might be reacting to events around themselves at these rallies.
Well, how people portray themselves, of course, and how they are two different things. We all can play that game. The reality is their job is to incite violence. Their job is to incite fear. Their job is to walk around public areas and to disrupt peaceful assemblies and people's First Amendment rights. Their job is to, in fact, intimidate, and in many instances we have seen to actually maim people, as they have in Portland, Oregon. I want to correct the record also of something that Professor Swain said as the former president of the Association for Ethnic Studies, for her to say that critical race theory is the reason why white people may allegedly feel some way about identity politics. I mean, she's an expert. I've read her books. There's zero causality there. I mean, the talking points are brilliant. I mean, if you want to call them that, but I mean, she's really embarrassing. She's really embarrassing her PhD. There's no causality in terms of that relationship there. She couldn't produce one logistic regression to prove what she just said. And I have to say, again, as a Black person who lives with HIV every day, who's openly gay, to stand here, or sit here rather, and to see that.
Okay, look. This is going a little bit off message at the moment. I want to get it back onto what we were talking about, and let's go to Sahar on this one. Something you wrote after the debate caught my attention, and one of the bits in it, you said, to be sure, Trump's primary targets of a domestic terrorism law will be left-wing and minority activists. What evidence do you have for that?
Well, just the fact that he has characterized the Black Lives Matter movement as a terrorist group. The Black Lives Matter movement is a civil rights movement. There is no evidence to show that the movement, those who organize
it hasn't been designated a terrorist movement.
No, he hasn't said it. I've said it.
I understand.
Carry on, Sahar.
There are people in his administration and many of his supporters who would like to designate them as a terrorist group. And when you get into things like Antifa, I'm not here to defend Antifa, or the anti-fascist group, but I did write an op-ed that essentially showed, or I did the research, and it shows that although there are people who identify as left-wing extremism who have engaged in violence, actually Antifa is really more a very aggressive protest movement, and they are not intentionally trying to engage in violence. Oftentimes what happens when there's looting or when there's violence in mass protests is it's either agent provocateurs or it's individuals who are not authorized or are clearly violating the instructions of the organizers of the protest to engage in violence, and then the entire left-wing movement is being smeared. But I want to go back to the Black Lives Matter and the critical race theory. Critical race theory is
Hang on. We only have about 6 minutes left, and there are some points that I particularly want to bring up, and that is how do we perhaps diffuse the situation. Ravi, let me come to you first of all. It is normally believe that unrest in people's minds, in their lives, in their radicalization is because of social factors. How do you change the dynamics here?
Well, I happen to be teaching a class now called The Problems of American Democracy on Representation and Misinformation. And as an educator, a lifelong educator and child of educators, I think the number one way that you change the so-called social unrest is through education. We have to make sure that in public education throughout the country that we are actually teaching critical race theory, teaching ethnic studies, teaching queer studies, teaching the murder of 20 million Native Americans. These are the kinds of things that are part of American history and global history. And the more that we continue to go day by day and year by year and ensure that our students around the country here in the United States do not learn about itself, and the way America has not only gotten old, but the way America hopefully can grow up, that is the way that we need to move forward to ensure that these issues can be diffused. Unfortunately, that's a long game. In the short term, we have to turn out and vote in November.
Okay, Carol, what do you say?
I think that we do need education, and we need to return to America's values and principles, the rule of law that undergirded our nation, our Constitution, and right now the rule of law seems to be lost in America. I think that the civil rights laws, they protect whites as well as blacks. We need to create a society where everyone is protected, everyone is being listened to. And I agree that we need to focus on history, but American history is a history of us making mistakes, making corrections, and it's a history of whites and blacks working together for the good. And as far as critical race theory, I don't think we need that indoctrination. It's divisive, it's Marxist, it's un-American, and I think it's very destructive. And Black Lives Matter, they say, the organizers say they are trained Marxists. They call themselves trained Marxists.
Carol, let me come in here.
Marxists want to overthrow our nation.
You're on Black Voices for Trump's advisory board. You say that's just in a small capacity, small part of what you do. But my question to you is, do you think President Trump will have alienated many of the black people who voted for him last time around because of his inability to control the race riots on the streets, because of some people in his administration condemning Black Lives Matter?
I don't think so. I think that he will get more of the black support. I would say between 15 and 20% of the black support. There's something taking place in America. Black people are waking up, and black people support the police. They know that their communities are communities where there's a lot of violence. And so I don't believe President Trump is being blamed for the riots. I think the political left and the Democrats are being blamed for the riots. And we have a situation now where people can't even defend themselves. When they try to defend themselves in some cities, the homeowner gets arrested rather than the people that are committing acts of violence.
Okay, Sahar, we're coming towards the end of the program. How do you turn it around? If extremism is on the rise, how do you push it back the other way?
We need to first teach critical thinking skills, and that means that students should be exposed to different interpretations of history, different interpretations of contemporary events, and that they have to be able to think for themselves.
I get that, but how do you explain that to somebody who has finished their education, who's not desperately well educated, who's already been radicalized, and who's exposed to all sorts of propaganda on the internet? How do you educate them?
Well, first is our political leaders need to be more responsible. We don't have those political leaders right now. We need political leaders who unify, not divide, who do not wink and nod to right-wing extremists or left-wing extremists. We need political leaders who don't interrupt the other side during a debate, who don't engage in ad hominem attacks against his opposition, who don't criminalize his opposition. What we have right now is a complete and utter failure of leadership. And so what we need is leaders who are civil, leaders who are unifying and not divisive in their rhetoric, and leaders who are willing to face the ugly truth of America, of its history, but also the beautiful things about America that caused hundreds of millions of immigrants over the years to have immigrated to this country. We need to be honest about who we are and be critical thinkers. And
would Joe Biden make it any different?
Yes.
Would Joe Biden make it any? I'm sorry. Ask the question.
Yeah. Okay, Ravi, I'll go to you quickly. We don't have very much time. Would he make it any different?
absolutely. I mean, he's married to an educator, a lifelong educator, and Dr. Joe Biden. He's made it clear that education will be a #1 priority. Just last night, Senator Kamala Harris, of course, a proud Howard graduate from '86, indicated that that they had as a priority for them is ensuring that.
But how will he educate the uneducated?
Well,
all right to teach it in universities.
Free college, first of all, for community colleges. And so those folks who have not yet finished college may have the opportunity to go back to college, particularly in with workforce and job force programs. And there's a whole host of technology out there and apps that give people access right in their handheld devices to information. All you have to do is go Google it.
Great to have you all on the program. I'm terribly sorry I had to interrupt, rather like as we saw during the presidential debate, but it's my job to move the argument on, and there certainly was a very robust argument exchange of views on this program. Much appreciate you coming on Roundtable, and much appreciate wherever you've been watching this edition of the show. From me, David Foster, from the team that put it all together. I hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.